Welcome back to the Cap Report. In this video, we will be discussing UFC 281, Adesanya vs. Pereira, looking over the fights and just making some predictions. I feel like this card has gone a little under the radar, but maybe that's just because of how much hype UFC 280 had. That being said, this should be a good one. We went 4-2 on picks for UFC 280. That's not too bad, other than, me being very wrong about Oliveira vs. Makhachev. I won't lie, I was very off the mark on that one. But on this card, we have two title fights with Adesanya vs. Pereira and Esparza vs. Weili, a banger in the feature fight with Dustin Poirier vs. Michael Chandler, and what will likely be Frankie Edgar's retirement fight. Rounding out the main card, Dan Hooker returning to lightweight. As always, there will be timestamps in the description. If you're only interested in certain fights, let's go ahead and get into it. We're going to start off with a quick discussion of the prelims, as I think there's some pretty notable fights on it. Blanchfield versus McCann, Dominic Reyes versus Stann, and Riddell versus Moicano. And so we're going ahead and we're going to open it up in the women's flyweight division in a top 15 matchup where 12th ranked Blanchfield takes on 15th ranked McCann. Both fighters are riding 3-fight win streaks into this fight, McCann with knockouts in her last 2, and Blanchfield with a submission in her last win. I really think the odds for this fight are quite deceiving. Blanchfield is a -380 favorite and McCann is a +310 underdog. Blanchfield should be the better wrestler out of the two, but I do have some concerns following her past fight with JJ Aldrich. That being said, if she can get this fight to the ground, I think Blanchfield can win it pretty easily. However, I do think there are a lot of concerns with her standing up with McCann. The way she presses forward into exchanges leaves a lot of opportunities for her to get caught, in my opinion, and McCann has the power to finish her. McCann has shown some impressive takedown defense in her last fight as well, and with that being said, I'm gonna pick Molly McCann by second round finish. I think that she'll have success stopping a takedown or two and will eventually catch Blanchfield on an entrance to an exchange. I like Blanchfield, but she's young and has a lot of room for development in her game, and I think Molly's got some really good momentum here and is taking this moment and opportunity seriously, and will find the finish because of that. Next up, we go to the light heavyweight division where 7th ranked Dominic Reyes makes his return against 12th ranked Stann. As I said, Reyes is returning for his first fight in 18 months. He's on a 3-fight losing streak, but only to top guys, with knockout losses to Yuri Prochaska, the current champion, Jan Blachowicz, the former champion, and a decision loss to John Jones, division's GOAT, which, in my opinion, I thought he won that fight. Stann has won 2 of his last 3, coming off a submission win over Ian Cutelaba most recently, and I think that it was smart for Reyes to take some time off. He took so much damage, particularly in the last 2 fights, both of those knockout losses. I think it was good to give his body some time to recover, and I think that mentally, it will help him a lot too. Going into that fight versus Jan after losing to Jones, it felt like his performance against Jones, despite losing, was negatively affecting him. Being like that guy who almost beat Jones or that guy who should have beat Jones. You know what I mean? I don't know. Maybe that's, armchair psychologist though. You know what I mean? So that could go either way. He spent time training at Glover Teixeira's gym with Glover and Alex Pereira, which I think will be good for him as well. Spann is great offensively and questionable defensively in pretty much every aspect of his game. It could make the fight competitive whether it's standing up or on the ground. Both these guys have the potential to knock each other out or be knocked out themselves. Reyes is a -215 favorite and Spann is a +185 underdog. I trust Dominic Reyes more in this situation. He's fared better against far better guys, and I think that his chin will hold up better than Spann's. I think Spann will attempt to push the pressure and maybe have some decent offensive output, but I just think that Reyes will find a finish with him 3rd round. So that's going to be my pick, Dominic Reyes by 3rd round TKO. And now finally, we'll move on to the top of the prelims in the lightweight division where Brad Riddell faces Renato Moicano. It's kind of crazy to think both these guys aren't ranked, just to show how strong lightweight is. Another great fight, I think, and this one could be a lot of fun. Riddell's coming off 2 straight losses, a knockout loss to Rafael Fiziev, and a submission loss to Jalen Turner, so it's not like he's losing to nobodies. Moicano is coming off a decision loss as well to Rafael dos Anjos that he took, I think, on less than a week's notice, I believe, and he had a submission win over Alexander Hernandez before that. Riddell is a striker who will mix in takedowns at times. Moicano is more of a grappler, but has good stand-up as well, so they kind of match up pretty interestingly because of that. That being said, I think we'll see it standing up more than on the ground. I think Moicano will be willing to stand with Riddell. Riddell shouldn't look to take the fight to the ground. I think Moicano has the range to be able to handle Riddell and not take too much damage, but he'll need to be careful leaving his body exposed. Moicano's a -125 favorite, and Riddell is a +105 underdog. The way I see this fight going, Riddell-Moicano standing up and going back and forth for a round or 2, with Riddell getting cracked late and Moicano finding a submission win off of the scramble, likely a guillotine or a rear naked choke. I'm going with Renato Moicano by 2nd round submission. Now we move on to the main card. We stay in the lightweight division for this opener where 12th ranked Dan Hooker takes on Claudio Puelles. Puelles is currently riding a 5-fight win streak, 3 of those by submission, most recently against Clay Guida. Now, Dan Hooker is on the opposite end of this, having won 1 of his last 5 fights, but in his defense, he has been through a murder's row of guys. Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler, Islam Makhachev, Arnold Allen. And that attempt to move back down to featherweight was a bad idea from the start, if we're being real, for Hooker. It obviously didn't end well, but allows him to come back up to lightweight where, I think he belongs. longs. This actually has a lot of the same feel as Dominic Reyes does earlier in this card, a guy who's on a bit of a losing streak too, but to only the top guys. You would think they're due for a win here. That being said, Puelles is no joke, particularly on the ground. If I was Hooker, I would keep this fight standing to the best of his ability, or I think it could end up a lot like the Islam Makhachev fight, where he ends up, getting submitted and being very disappointed with his performance. But I mean, at least in that one, he got a bag. Luckily, Hooker comes from what I'd say is the best anti-wrestler camp in MMA in city kickboxing. To me, this fight is that simple. If Hooker keeps the fight standing, he should be able to show that he's levels above his competition. If fight goes to the ground, he'll be in some really murky water. Hooker's a minus 155 favorite, and Puelles is a plus 135 underdog. The line has shifted Puelles' direction since opening up. I think that Dan Hooker will win this fight by a second round knockout. I think Puelles has a ton of quality, but he's 26. He still has a lot of room to grow, and to be honest, I'm sort of surprised by this matchmaking, but at the same time, I do kind of get it to an extent. Give Hooker a guy he should be able to beat, a step down in competition, but they get to highlight an up-and-comer and start to get his name out there, even if he loses. And if he wins, Dan Hooker is a great name to have on his resume, will just, really boost the Puelles' exposure. Next up, we move to the bantamweight division. 12th ranked Frankie Edgar faces Chris Gutierrez. I've just noticed this, but we got a lot of 12th ranked guys on this card. This is pretty interesting. But this is looking to be Frankie Edgar's retirement fight, and I just hope he doesn't go out too badly. I'm not gonna lie, I was never a huge Frankie Edgar fan. As a kid, I had beef with him for beating BJ Penn twice. My favorite fighter of all time is Benson Henderson, so, there's some beef there too with both the title fights. That being said, he's a legend, and I have a ton of respect for him, and I would like to see him go out on a win. He's currently on a 2-fight loss streak, both really bad knockout losses. One to Corey Sandhagen and another to Marlon Vera. Though to be fair, didn't look bad in that Cheeto Vera fight up until he got knocked out, which, is an easy thing to say. He looked good until he got finished, but he was, I think the scorecards were tied. I think it was 1-1, and he got finished. I mean, it was a brutal knockout though, for being real. Gutierrez is riding a 7-fight unbeaten streak with a draw mixed in there, and he's got 2 finishes in that run as well. Surprisingly, I think there are paths to victory for both guys here. Gutierrez is a great striker with a big emphasis on leg kicks, and he also has good offensive wrestling. Leg kicks are a bit of Frankie Edgar's kryptonite. Gutierrez will want to hit those early and often to slow down Edgar's wrestling, and if he can keep the fight standing and land clean enough, he should be able to put Edgar out at some point. Edgar's 41, he's knocked out twice last year, so I definitely think it's in the realm of possibility that he gets put out again. In both times, that finish came through the middle, a flying knee and a front kick, so Gutierrez should look for shots down the middle like uppercuts or, knees, things that will also work well against takedown. For Edgar, his volume striking could provide some issues for Gutierrez, but he's going to want to wrestle, get this fight to the ground, and grind out this win. I don't trust his durability enough beyond that, if we're being real. Gutierrez is a minus 205 favorite for this fight, and Edgar is a plus 175 underdog. Part of me feels like Edgar could pull it out one last time, just being relentless with the takedowns and controlling the fight on the ground. But MMA can be a cruel sport, and in many of these situations with legends, it doesn't play out the way we want it to. I'm going to go with Gutierrez by 3rd round knockout. I think Edgar will have some success wrestling, but he's going to tire out by the later rounds and get caught late in the fight, similar to what happened with the Cheeto Vera fight. Now we move back to the lightweight division for a top 5 matchup in the feature fight as 2nd ranked Dustin Poirier faces 5th ranked Michael Chandler. Chandler is 2-2 since entering the UFC last year with wins over Dan Hooker and Tony Ferguson, both by finish. He's also lost to Charles Oliveira and Justin Gaethje, so he's only fighting the top guys. Poirier is 3-1 in his last 4 with 2 wins over Conor McGregor and Dan Hooker, his loss being to Charles Oliveira as well. There might even be title shot implications in this one, and I hope not though for Beneil Dariush's sake. Maybe the winner of this fight fights him, for the next title shot after Alex gets a go at it. When I previously discussed this fight, I compared it to Poirier versus McGregor as Chandler holds that, power and explosiveness advantage. However, assuming Chandler finally uses his wrestling, which he has seemed to just thrown by the wayside since, coming into the UFC, I think he presents a more difficult challenge for Poirier. This is definitely a winnable fight for either guy. Looking at path to victory, I'll start with Michael Chandler. As I said, he has the power and explosive advantage here, so I'd say he should be looking to set up moments for those to shine, rather than getting into exchanges with Poirier. He should use his wrestling to set this up. If he's able to keep the fight on the ground, that's fine. He can probably land some solid damage and even win a round that way. That being said, the goal of the wrestling is more so to add another element into the striking for him. Forcing Poirier to respect that aspect of the game helps Chandler in the stand-up. Despite, Chandler's jaw-dropping front kick knockout of Tony Ferguson in his last fight, I don't think we're going to see many kicks from either of these guys. More so likely is a lot of boxing exchanges or scenarios, but by setting up the wrestling, he can implement feints to give him more opportunities to land cleanly on Poirier. He might even be able to land a similar knockout to what he did to Dan Hooker, where he showed that takedown, he had his head at the hip levels, not even looking up, and threw that looping overhand and caught Hooker completely off guard. I think that style of game plan is Chandler's best chance to win, in my opinion at least. And looking at it for Poirier, he's the better boxer of the two. If he can draw Chandler into exchanges, I think Poirier will generally get the better of them, as he can land better combinations and is just more defensively sound as well. I think the path for him to take is to be somewhat cautious earlier on and try and start throwing those leg kicks to take away some of that, to take away some of Chandler's power and explosiveness. Gaethje had so much success with this against Chandler. Later on, following the leg kicks, Poirier can kind of more safely enter those exchanges with Chandler, and I think that he can start to throw more of those combinations he had. If you get Chandler against the cage with the combinations flowing, I think he can drop him and find a finish. Poirier's a minus 175 favorite, which I agree with. Chandler being a plus 150 underdog, which isn't, I think it's good value for Chandler. There's, as I said, he's so explosive, there's always a chance that he's going to find a knockout. But how I see this playing out isn't much different than my original prediction. I see Chandler being able to damage Poirier decently early on. Poirier will invest in the leg kicks and eventually sap out a lot of Chandler's power. Round 2, he'll be able to exchange with Chandler much more freely, land those relentless combinations, and find a second round knockout. So my pick is El Diamante, Dustin Poirier by second round knockout. Now it's time for the title fights. First, in the women's strawweight division, second ranked Zhang Weili takes on the champion Carla Esparza. Esparza's won 6 straight with an all-time snoozer most recently, where she took the belt from Thug Rose Namajunas. A decision win, as we said, I think it's probably gonna go down as one of the worst fights of the year. Maybe in title fight history, if we're being real. It was like Adesanya Romero level, right? Zhang Weili is coming off a big knockout win over Joanna Jędrzejczyk and is 4-2 in her last 6. Her only 2 losses being to the former champion Thug Rose. The first, a flash head kick knockout. The second time around, it was a much closer decision, even though she still lost. It's kind of interesting actually seeing Weili get another title shot here, even though I think she might have needed another win to really deserve it. Between this and running back Rose versus Esparza, let's be real, this is definitely the better option here, right? We get a former champion in Zhang Weili, and looking at the path to victory for her, it's pretty much anything she wants to do in my opinion. I think she'll bring the fight a lot more to Esparza. Her striking will give Esparza a ton of trouble. The big thing will be keeping the fight standing. I don't think Weili's screwed if the fight goes to the ground. It's just a more difficult path to victory for her. I think that if Esparza gets the fight to the ground, Weili will be able to get it back up. For Esparza, the paths to victory are pretty minimal to me. I think she had to get the fight to the ground, went on that ground and pound, or even lay and pray. But looking at the odds, Zhang Weili is a minus 340 favorite, and Esparza is a plus 300 underdog, and you can't really disagree, right? In my opinion, this will likely be a worse version of the Joanna fight for Carla Esparza. I see Weili being able to stuff a takedown or 2, dominating the striking, and finding a finish in the first or the second round. I'm gonna go ahead and say Zhang Weili by second round knockout for my pick officially. And finally, we've made it to the main event. In the middleweight division, 4th ranked Alex Pereira takes on the champion Israel Adesanya. Pereira's on a 3-fight win streak with 2 wins by knockout, the most recent one over Sean Strickland. Adesanya is also on a 3-fight win streak. However, his are all by decision over Marvin Vettori, Robert Whitaker, although I think that one's quite debatable, and Jared Cannonier. As you've heard a million times by now, there's history between these two. Pereira beat Adesanya twice in kickboxing, knocking him out in their second fight, knocking him out brutally, and I believe he became the first person to knock out Adesanya by doing that. He might be the only one. I'm not sure off the top of my head. Looking back on those fights, Adesanya should have won the first fight. Originally watching it, I thought it was pretty close, but having gone back and watched it again, I think it's actually pretty clear that Adesanya won that fight. I don't think it's really close at all. Just on, a second viewing, Pereira does not land as much as it looks like he does. Even Pereira was surprised when he won that fight, that first fight. You can see it in his face. In the second fight, Adesanya it's kind of crazy actually, because Adesanya was far more dominant than he was in the first fight, up until he got knocked out, which, there goes that phrase again, It's all, it's great you're dominating, but when you get knocked out, you lose, right? And this is the perfect opportunity to transition this into the discussion of how the dynamics of this fight changed moving from kickboxing to MMA. Pereira received a standing 8 count in the second round of that fight before later on knocking out Adesanya. You don't get that in MMA. In MMA, that likely means that you're getting finished. I've covered the basics on this before in a previous video. The biggest difference outside of the multiple styles versus one style is the glove sizes. MMA uses 4-ounce gloves versus the 10-12-ounce gloves used in their previous fight. I'm not sure if it's 10 or 12 on top of my head. I think I've seen both numbers thrown out there. It means the gloves are much smaller and the power bleeds through a lot more. It affects techniques and what will be viable. One aspect that I haven't discussed previously is that the change in the cage size from ropes to cage. The cage size in MMA is much bigger, which makes it a lot harder to trap opponents. The difference in the cage versus the ropes is also that, the ropes give you a lot more flexibility and maneuvering on them in defense, versus the MMA cage doesn't allow you to do as much in that regard. You know what I mean? There's not much more space for you to go back. You can go over the ropes, but in the cage, you're kind of held into your position. All you can do is move, along, laterally along the cage, not really into it that much. You can a little bit, but not much. Now, how do all these changes and factors affect these fighters and this matchup? I think most of these changes benefit Adesanya, if we're being honest. Yes, the glove size change makes Pereira even more dangerous with him already having having knockout power in 10-ounce gloves, but it also makes Adesanya more dangerous, and his shots will hit harder as well. Another aspect I discussed when previously talking about these changes is the glove changes benefiting Adesanya's style far more than Pereira's, in my opinion. Adesanya used a lot more head movement and footwork in general in their fights and in their old fights as well, and Adesanya's done it a lot more in MMA. He's become a lot more footwork focused in terms of his defensive style. Pereira relied a lot more on the high guard and using those bigger gloves to help cover and soak up the damage. You can even see it in the lead up to his standing 8 count in their second fight. I think the cage size benefits Adesanya as well, allowing him to move around a lot more and making it far more difficult for him to get closed off against the cage like he was getting closed off against the ropes consistently. Next, we move on to another question I see asked a lot about this fight, and that's who shoots for a takedown first? And I think no one does. I really don't see a reason either guy looks for a takedown here, to be honest. I get that it provides more nuance to the fight, but I don't see it benefiting either fighter. Adesanya has shown us more to believe that he has a ground game that could be used, though it did look really rough in that Jan Blachowicz fight, but you know, maybe there's something to be said about the weight difference in that fight, right? And that being said, Pereira trains with Glover Teixeira, which leads me to believe that he'll be prepared if anything was to happen in the grappling department here. Ultimately, I think that it all balances itself out, and I don't think we see anything happen there. I don't think either guy, whichever guy looks to grapple first in this fight, is in a very bad position if they are. And I think that whoever grapples first is likely the one who's going to lose this fight. If that happens. I don't think it's going to happen at all, though, to be fair. Looking at past the victory here, we're going to start with Alex Pereira. I think the fight favors him more early on, and I think earlier on there will be better opportunities for him to land, particularly before Adesanya is able to get a feel for the range. I do think we'll see Pereira take the fight to Izzy unlike many of his previous opponents and apply pressure. I think I did say that about Cannonier as well, and that did not pan out as well. But it's different here. Pereira has the confidence. I mean, I think that he will have to be careful and cautious in terms of how he moves at Izzy, but I do think that there is a level of confidence there that he'll be able to press Izzy a little more successfully than other fighters have, especially because I think Izzy has like a 1-inch reach advantage on him. His reach advantage is far less than it has been on most of his previous opponents, if I remember correctly. He's going to want to try and close off the octagon to Izzy and get him against the cage, similarly to how he did in their previous fights, getting him against the ropes. That being said, it's going to be more difficult here since the cage is just so much bigger and Adesanya has amazing footwork. In the closer exchanges, he did well against Izzy, and I think that's where he found the knockout before, so that's something I want him to look for. If he's able to cut off the octagon, get Izzy against the cage into those closer exchanges, he might be able to catch Izzy in that kind of situation. One last detail I think that's worth mentioning is that he should look to throw the leg kicks as he has in the past. It's something small and easy that has consistently given Adesanya the advantage on point fighting in many of his previous fights. So it will be important to counterbalance that in the case that this fight does go to a decision. If you let Izzy just throw leg kicks consistently, he's going to steal rounds that way. But if you're throwing them back at him, you'll at least, as I said, counterbalance his offense to make the round look closer, or even just not give him those easy rounds that he's used to getting in the past. I think Pereira could win this fight either by decision or by knockout. You know what I mean? I think either of those are possibilities for him. It just depends on maybe the approach he takes to the fight, you know, and how much respect he gives Adesanya. Now, looking from Adesanya's perspective, I think people forget how dangerous he is. I truly think that if Pereira isn't careful when pressuring forward, that he could get caught and knocked out by Adesanya. Hopefully that's not too hot of a take. I feel like I've seen a lot of people who don't think that that's even possible online, but Adesanya is naturally more of a defensive fighter with his counter-punching style. He was, I will say, a lot more aggressive in their second fight in kickboxing, and I wonder if we'll see any of that in this fight, as he had success once he found the range and timing. And I think with a bigger cage, Izzy won't get closed off nearly as much as he did in their previous fights, if at all. I'm really interested to see how he approaches this fight. I think it will be, as I said, I think it will be a more defensive style, and I think he'll look to catch Pereira when he's being too aggressive. Early on, I think that he'll be kind of filling out the range, kind of probably keeping his distance, you know, see a decent amount of hand fighting and things like that. I think per the usual, you'll get a lot of leg kicks, but I think you'll see a good variety of them to the body as well. As I think Pereira is going to leave his body open from that higher guard, so I think there will be a lot of points where the body shots are going to be there. I think Adesanya can find a win from a decision here, or as I said, I think that he can find a knockout as well. Adesanya is the -165 favorite, Pereira's +140 underdog. I can't really complain with those odds. I think they're pretty spot on. And how I see this fight playing out is like this. I think that the fight will open up with Pereira attempting to pressure and control the octagon, which won't really bother Adesanya. He'll be looking to fill out the range, as I said, with the hand fighting and some cautious shots here and there, and throwing out a lot of leg kicks. I think that in the first round or two, Pereira will land a few big shots. By the third round, you'll see a lot more kickboxing exchanges between the two, as Pereira kind of tires a little into the fourth. You'll see him get a little sloppy, but he'll still be applying pressure and walk into some big shots from Adesanya, where I think eventually Adesanya will find a finish. So my pick is Israel Adesanya by 4th round knockout. With that being said, we've reached the end of the video. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already. already, it means a lot. Leave a comment too. What are your picks for this card? What do you think of my picks? As always, this has been the Cap Report. Shout out to all 388 subscribers and anyone who subbed from this video. Unfortunately for this card, I'm not gonna lie, my job is gonna be very busy. I feel like I'm not gonna get to watch any of these fights live, but I hope y'all enjoy them. Maybe I'll get to, you know, catch. I think if I can just catch the Chandler Poirier fight and the Adesanya Pereira fight, I'll be happy, but I don't think that's possible. Peace, y'all.